Matt, my brother,
Nice.
welcome to the Superhuman Life.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah, really excited. I've been looking forward to this for a while. I know you have incredible story and journey, and I believe you're doing some very important work right now. So I'm really excited to dive into that, get into your book a little bit and point people in a direction if it's something they're interested in exploring. So I mentioned it in the intro here, Matt. I just want to bring it up one more time before we really dive into the conversation. Nothing shared here today is a prescription or a recommendation. For me, it's an exploration of psychedelic assisted therapy. I like the language that you very specific there with that. So I just want to make sure everybody listening to this, we're not pointing you to go tell you to do something. We're hopefully going to answer some questions, maybe introduce some new concepts and ideas, and do that with what you want. So I'm excited, Matt.
I am too, and I appreciate you saying that. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a lawyer. So if you're looking for medical or legal advice, this is probably not the right podcast to be listening to.
Probably not the right show. We're about exploring fascinating topics and ideas and bringing insights to help people further improve the quality of their life. One thing you have on your LinkedIn profile, it's a quote here. I think I want to start here, Matt. I don't believe psychedelics are for everyone, or I'm sorry, I don't believe everyone should take psychedelics, but I do believe psychedelics are for everyone. Can you tell us what that means?
Yeah, I feel really strongly about that. But to answer that question, I kind of have to rewind just a little bit. So
let's go back.
Again, 3 years ago, I was never a drug user. It wasn't my thing. Not even a big drinker. But I had a chance to do a guided psilocybin journey, which is magic mushrooms for those of you who don't know. And I was kind of hesitant. I was like, I don't need to do this. Why would I do this? But I had some trusted friends who said, look, we're bringing this person and he's this guide and it's an exploration. Think of it as taking a trip or think of it as taking a course. And I was like, you know what? All right, I'll do it. I trust these guys and let's try this. And it was amazing. It was a beautiful, profound, incredibly spiritual experience where both my parents died when I was younger, and I was able to reconnect with my mom in this in a way that in my wildest imagination, I couldn't have imagined it happening. I was able to kind of reconceive my thoughts about death and about heaven and about all these different things in this one experience. And it completely changed my life. And in the years since then, I've come to really study psychedelics and study the history. And I've realized that, oh my gosh, the things I've been taught for all my life were just not true. And so why did this book and that saying, that quote that you started with is all about whether you choose to take a psychedelic or not. I think it is reasonable to say you should understand at least the good that they can do for other people. And because of that, and that good, I think, can make society better. And because society is better, it makes everybody better. So I do believe psychedelics are for everyone, even if you personally don't want to take one yourself. Does that make sense?
I love that. 100%. I love it. I love it so much. Are you able to, articulate or explain? Because you said some powerful language. It changed my life, right? I mean, I don't know, I don't assume you just, use that language lightly. Is there anything you're able to, share? And number one, about the experience. I think that would be very enlightening. If there's anything, you talked about this reconnection, with your folks and parents, your mom specifically. What was that like? Was it physical? Was it mental in your mind? Did your mom emerge out of a fruit bowl and was talking to you? Can you kind of explain a little bit about the experience and how it changed your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing with, I think for a lot of people who pray or who meditate, like you can do that for a long time and not really be sure if anything is happening. But nobody's ever taken a large amount of a psychedelic and wondered like, oh, well, nothing happened. The other thing I'll say about that is you can go to therapy or talk to people and hear advice and kind of intellectually understand something. But when you feel it in your body and in your heart and in your bones, it's different. So in this experience, I mean, again, I had never experienced anything like this where I've just was connected to the ground and to the trees and to the air. But then when my mom appeared, I could pull a string from her through me to my children. And in an instant, I realized, oh my gosh, she's not gone. I'm her moving forward, and my kids are me moving forward. And we're all still together somehow in this crazy universe that we live in, but we're all still together. And then that led in that same, like the next instant was like, oh my gosh, I've been living my life afraid of dying. And I don't need to be afraid of dying. There's nothing to be scared of. And I'm loved and I'm safe. And realizing that, oh my gosh, I don't think I've ever felt loved or safe before. And now I can feel it. And I like this feeling. And I'd like to understand more about this feeling. So I came out of, and again, a lot of other things happen. I mean, this journey is like 6-7 hours, but coming out of that, I was like, I don't want to just run businesses anymore. I need to learn more about what happened. I need to understand more about psychology and neuroscience, and I need to learn more about psychedelics. And then that's what I've been on this journey. I went back to school 30 years after my last science class and got a master's in psychology and neuroscience and mental health, dove deep into psychology, and then put this book together to take this information that I'm gathering and put it in a way that's neither too woo-woo or too opinionated, but that's just medically backed. Here are the facts, and let people make their own decisions based on that.
Yeah, and that's why we have here today, right? That's exactly how I kind of, started, is we're going to explore this here together. I love how you gave some examples of, ways that maybe people can have had an experience similar to what you described. I mean, you described like the ultimate, denial of self, complete ego dissolution, like you felt, just connected, with everything. I think, for maybe a lot of our listeners, maybe they've experienced something similar, maybe in a worship, in environment when you're really, connected with the music and you're in complete surrender there. I know I've definitely, experienced similar type of things. And I love that, you had the experience, but then it triggered like the exploration into understanding what was happening. So in your study, in your research, that ego dissolution, like, can you explain what is happening to our brain, to our mind, and how we're able to tap into, that state, that experience?
Yeah, I think there are two things that are really kind of important to know, and just kind of the science behind this. One is there's this default mode network, this part of our brain that's kind of always functioning and doing stuff. And when you take a psychedelic, it kind of turns that down for a minute and allows your brain to function differently. The other thing that happens is most of us, especially as we get older, we start getting into what's called repetitive thought, or we start literally thinking the same way because our neurons are firing the same way. And when you take a psychedelic, if you can imagine, you have, and this is not a number, but let's pretend you had 10 neurons firing in your brain and they're all firing the same directions every day. And all of a sudden you take a psychedelic and those paths are shut down. And now but it allows 1,000 neurons to fire in all these different ways. And for a moment, you're kind of lifted out of the way you've been thinking and allowed to kind of see another way to think. And then from that, you can start changing your life and changing your habits and changing the way you interact with the world. And so from, again, there's lots of opinions and studies and things. My personal belief is that psychedelics are not it's not a cure. It's not a panacea. It is a catalyst for change. It's something you do. And then once you do it, it frees up your mind. And then you can go and start doing different things to live a healthier, more productive, loving existence.
And that's why in getting ready for this, in my research on you, I brought it up at the beginning, very specific with the language that you use, psychedelic assisted therapy. I think a lot of people think that This could be maybe just, my stupid opinion here, but I think that there's a lot of people out there that assume that I'm going to take a magic mushroom and it's going to work magic. I'm going to take a mind altering substance and it's going to permanently alter my mind for the good. What is the danger in that way of thinking, and why does it need to be assisted therapy with, professional assistance in your opinion?
Yep. And professional in this case it doesn't necessarily mean licensed. So it can be psychedelic assisted therapy with a licensed therapist, but it can also be with a guide or a shaman, depending or a clergy member, depending on how you found your way to the medicine. I mean, we're seeing for the first time some of the major, at least the Unitarians, as an example, have a whole psychedelics and theology program. I know a number of the seminaries have started to incorporate psychedelic studies into their program. So it's really interesting, this intersection between mainstream religion and psychedelics. And it's not just on the Christian side. There's a Islamic and Judaism and Buddhist that all have these different connections with this. I did lose track of the initial question though, as I went down this path.
Oh, why? So why? Why professional or assistant or guided? Yep. I love that you gave the distinction there. I love to circle back on the Christian stuff too. Maybe we can get back to that, because I know there's a whole world of, not world, but there's a whole group of people that believe that certain books within the Bible were written in psilocybin journey. So maybe we can explore that a little bit later on. But the need for assistance or guided. Why can't we just take the magic mushroom and it works magic?
Yep. So let's then back up just even another step and just remind everybody these are for the most part, with the exception of ketamine, which is legal here in the United States. All of these different substances are illegal. So where you get them from is important. When you take them, the two most important things that that the science is showing that matters is called set and setting. So set is kind of, what is your mindset going into the experience? Are you prepared? And a lot of times a guide or a therapist is going to help you before you take the medicine by asking you, what is your intention? What are you trying to explore? What are you thinking about as you go into this experience? And they're also going to prepare you by saying, these are the types of things that can happen on an experience. There's no such thing as a bad trip, but there might be a challenging trip. So if something happens that's challenging, what do you do? So they prepare you for all of that. The setting is the environment. Are you comfortable in this place that you are in when you're going to take this medicine, that you are safe and that you're not going to be interrupted and you're not going to be asked to do anything, and that you're surrounded by people that love you and care for you and are going to keep you safe? Making sure that is set up is again super important. When you have both set and setting aligned, the probability of a challenging trip goes way, 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 way down. I think Johns Hopkins, again, they obviously, for all their clinical studies, I think it's 1% or 2% of the people have a challenging experience, or I'd go so far as a bad experience in this case, when set and setting are aligned. A number of people have what we might consider a challenging experience, but they'll still put it, this is kind of a wild thing, they'll put this, for people who take a psychedelic, more than half will say it is the most important thing that's ever happened to them in their life. More than half. And then the other, the next 30 or some percent will put it in the top 5. So there's very few things in the world that, you're talking, people are saying like, yeah, this is probably more important than my kids and my wife and it sounds unbelievable, but it's that profound of an experience, or can be that profound of an experience when done right, with proper preparation in a good setting, with the right medicine for the right person.
How long have we been studying psychedelics?
Oh, that's a good question. So wildly, there was a whole period of studying of psychedelics before the Controlled Substances Act of 1970. And I'm not talking about lightly studying. I'm talking about thousands of papers on, we can use LSD to combat alcoholism. We can use MDMA to help with couples therapy. Lots and lots and lots of papers. And then we took a right turn as a country and said, oh no, this is going to be completely illegal. And we declared them actually Schedule 1 drugs, which means they are a high risk of abuse, no accepted medical use, and unsafe. None of which is true. There is not a high risk of abuse. There's many medical uses, and they are, for the most part, in comparison to other medicines, very safe. But that's what we did as a country. You and I grew up in this just say no generation where we had drilled into our head, drugs are bad. This is your mind. This is your brain on drugs. And we were just taught, brainwashed, a series of falsehoods about these. But so you have the studying period up until 1970. Then you had a prohibition that lasted into the 90s. And then we had different universities start to pick it up again. Today, 309 academic institutions either have a psychedelic center or are studying psychedelics. So we're talking about Harvard, Yale, Johns Hopkins, Berkeley, University of Wisconsin, Madison, Alabama, University of North Carolina right up the street from me. They just got a $27 million grant from the Department of Defense to study two particular aspects of the psychedelic. I mean, it just goes on, and certainly around the world. Imperial College, King's College, multiple countries. There's so much research being done right now on these different psychedelics.
How much of what's keeping this out of, maybe the mainstream here is because these psychedelics are not, they're not manufactured drugs. I mean, these many of these are natural substances grown, in the earth. So I'm assuming that there's certain powerful pharmaceutical organizations that maybe have a say in some of these things. I don't want to go too deep here, but is there something there that is keeping this down? And then if that's the case, do you think because of what you were just sharing here with 300 plus institutions and universities that we're beginning to see a turn? And I guess what does maybe the next 10 to 20 years look like if you had to forecast it?
That's a lot of questions, but I'm going to take them all. Yeah, I mean, you can follow the money in all sorts of different ways here. So let's talk about first the legal psychedelic, which is ketamine. So ketamine was created in 1970 as an anesthesia. By 1974, they realized, oh my goodness, people are having these dissociative experiences on this. That's not what this was made for. And they started studying it for mental health. But today, it's a generic. So there's no money in it for big pharma for ketamine to be widely used. There was a company, Johnson & Johnson, created a version of ketamine and did go through the FDA process for mental health specifically. But that costs like, I don't know, 700-800 times more than generic ketamine. So it's not used that much. But today, anybody in America can go to a doctor and have ketamine, a legal psychedelic, prescribed. So then your next question, though, and I'm going to go to the illegal drugs here in a moment. Your next question, though, is why else would big pharma not want this to happen? Well, when you take something like ketamine, maybe up front you take 6 doses within 3 to 6 weeks. So maybe twice a week for 3 weeks or once a week for 6 weeks, something like that. And then after that initial 6 doses, maybe you don't take any more. Or maybe you take them once a week or once every 2 weeks or once a month or once a quarter. But you don't take them every day. And because you don't take them every day, there's no revenue coming into whoever is selling it every day. So based on how our medical system works, there's not a lot of incentive for ketamine to be the drug of choice that's prescribed.
Yeah,
and that's frustrating.
Powerful quote from the movie Social Dilemma. I don't know if you've seen it. It rings true to obviously the work that I do with men that are struggling with an addiction or compulsion behavior with technology devices. The only 2 industries in the world that call their customers users are the pharmaceutical industry and technology. So I think it's just speaking directly to, right? It's like we don't want to cure you. We want you as a lifetime recurring revenue customer to our top and bottom line as a user.
It's a great quote. It's a great movie. Yeah, and take it another step. I mean, there hasn't really been another option for people in 50 years in our country. So since antidepressants really came around, So if antidepressants work, if somebody's listening and antidepressants work for them, fantastic. That's great. Stay with what you're doing. All the power to you. But for 40% of those that are taking antidepressants, they don't work. And then for those that, even if it does work, there's a lot of side effects that are pretty hard. Everything from loss of cognition to weight gain, gastrointestinal issues, lack of sexual libido. It just goes on and on. And it becomes and to try to get off of them, the withdrawal is brutal. Ketamine has really little to no side effects. There's a certain subpopulation, 2, 3, 4%, who get nauseous when they're taking ketamine. There's some that have an increase in your blood pressure during the session, but these side effects that plague those who take antidepressants just don't exist in the psychedelic world, which is amazing. It's just kind of sad that people just don't know about this. And that insurance doesn't cover it, and on and on. It's not ideal with our medical system. So that's all legal psychedelics. Going to the illegal side, when you there's actually a great paper that's done. It talks about kind of harm to self and others on the left side, and it ramps like what's the most harm to yourself or others versus the least harm to self or others. As you would imagine, like alcohol, heroin, far left, can do a lot of harm to yourself, can do a lot of harm to others. What's at the furthest part of the right side? Mushrooms. So when you talk about the safety profile of mushrooms, of LSD, it's a pretty safe, relatively, it's a pretty safe medicine to experiment with. And then in between, just I'm not trying to Pollyanna this, there's things like ibogaine, which, if you're taking ibogaine, there's a risk of cardiac events, and that's a much harder medicine. And there's a whole different medical process that you probably should look at. And then there's things like MDMA, which again, clinically amazing. But if you're taking it outside of a doctor's supervision, there's dehydration issues and other things that happen with MDMA that is just at least to be aware of. So those are some of the safety things that I think about in the world of psychedelics.
Is there ever a fear or worry or concern of people getting addicted to maybe not the substance, but the experience in and of itself? I mean, that sounded pretty amazing, right? Felt connected with all. Maybe there's fruit talking to me. I don't know. Maybe the walls are, beginning to breathe. Is there a worry and concern? Obviously, I believe certain people lean more towards addictive or compulsive, tendencies. So I'm just curious if that's something that has been looked at, talked about or discussed.
Yeah, there's two beautiful books on this. One is Drug Use for Grown-Ups by Dr. Carl Hart, who's a professor at Columbia who has been studying addiction for his whole career. And Chasing the Scream would be the other one. So let's talk about addiction for a moment. How do we know if a substance is addicted? And it starts kind of with your animal trials. And you put an animal in a cage, you give them a button for food and a button for drugs. And if they take the drugs over the food, probably addicted. So that with almost all psychedelics, there is no physical addiction process. So they're actually anti-addictive. Your body doesn't want you to do them repeatedly, which is super interesting. But ketamine, when used recreationally, so we're talking about people who typically are snorting this medicine, they're using it as a powder, and there has been some addiction cases with ketamine, but not in the medical or clinical studies that have been done for pain and for mental health. MDMA feels really good. And for the kids who are in the party scene, we all knew it as, when we were growing up, as ecstasy. It feels good. And there are people who do that repeatedly. But again, you're probably not going to do MDMA every day. And then certainly the experiences I can talk about, I can personally talk about ayahuasca and 5-MeO and psilocybin and LSD. And you definitely don't want, there's no urge that, oh, I want to do that again tomorrow. You can wait a while in between sessions, because they're hard. They're emotionally hard, and depending on the medicine, some of them can be physically hard.
Yeah, and I know from personal experience, the ecstasy, MDMA, in a recreational, party type of environment. And I can recall and remember, one thing that those nights would be. I'll be fully, honest here. Like some of the best, funnest, nights. I don't, I'm not advocating or, advising anybody go explore that. But it's always followed by, like a massive crash days later. And I know there's, these dopamine, serotonin, just massive, like spikes. And when you have a spike, it's going to be followed by a crash. So I guess in the therapeutic type of a setting, like what are they doing to blunt that or help and not experience that crash after the fact, or is that something that is just going to come?
So so a couple of things here, and this is so I have a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old. So this is something I think about. But when there was a study done on an MDMA where they went and gathered lots of different MDMA from different on the street sources, more than half had zero MDMA inside of it. The next, I think 2/3 had some other substance blended with the MDMA, and then I think the top 20% was pure MDMA. So for many people, when they think they're taking MDMA or ecstasy, they're taking some type of blend of something. So you don't know what that is. In addition, for those who are taking it in a recreational setting, a lot of times they're doing it with alcohol, and that has its own set of it's fighting in some ways with the MDMA. So when you do MDMA assisted therapy, and again you've prepared and you're ready for this, and you're going to take pure MDMA in a therapist's office, and you're going to go through that experience, you're not going to have the crash that you would as you've talked about in the recreational setting. And then let me just for the listeners who don't, just to give a sense of how powerful MDMA is. So and why is it getting bipartisan support? Why are Republicans and Democrats and Republican donors and Democrat donors all funding MDMA studying? The FDA it looks like they will approve this for legal use in the United States within the next year, 2 years tops. When you take people who are treatment resistant and have post-traumatic stress disorder and have tried everything and they can't shake it. So what populations? We're talking about our veterans. We're talking about people with victims of sexual assault. So they've lived with this very challenging condition. When they have their clinical trials, there's a phase 3 clinical trial happening right now. They go through 2 MDMA sessions. 67% no longer have PTSD. Not that it's been reduced, it's eliminated. And that's it. They're not going back and doing MDMA for a third session. It is gone. And again, this is you can look it up right now. You can look for those who are curious about this. Type in MDMA phase 3 trials or MAPS phase 3 MDMA, and you'll see these results. It's astounding. So again, there hasn't been an option in 50 years besides antidepressants, and now there's going to be an option, and it's a game changer for this entire set of the population to live a healthier life.
Guys, so it's hard. It's hard to wrap my head around like the success of some of these trials and why this isn't like the conversation that is just front and center everywhere. I mean, where there's just so much going on in the world and so many people suffering that don't know that this is even an option or it's there. So maybe we can maybe here zoom in a little bit on the listeners. I obviously said we weren't prescribing or recommending anything, but so if we know that they can be for everybody, but not everybody should take them, where should people begin to evaluate themselves to see if it's something to at least explore and have the conversation themselves about where can I get these things, maybe reach out, like do they reach out to somebody for a consultation, but where do they need to be first, I guess, is maybe the better place to start.
So I love that question. I'm going to answer a couple of different ways. So first, there's a beautiful book called How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. And he, in his 60s, decided to go ahead and he's a journalist who wrote The Omnivore's Dilemma, and decided, I'm going to go ahead and take a number of different medicines. I'm going to write about it. And I'm also going to write about the research. So that's just kind of a good broad book to give people an introduction. But if you don't like reading, Netflix just released a 4-part series called How to Change Your Mind. And you can, in 4 hours of watching this Netflix series, get a lot of what the content is in the book. When people come to me and say, where should I start? My first question back to them is, well, what are you doing this for? Are you doing this because you really want therapy? Or are you doing this because you want to expand your consciousness? Or are you doing this because you have a substance use dependency or some other type of compulsive behavior that you're wrestling with? So if they say, well, it's the therapy that I'm interested in. I'll say, well, if you're here in the United States, the easiest place to start would be with ketamine. There's probably 700 different ketamine clinics around the country. You can go in and you can have intravenous ketamine. You can have intramuscular ketamine. And there's even mail order companies where they will connect you with a prescriber. And they will, if you qualify, they will send you the ketamine. They'll prepare you virtually with a guide. They will help prepare your sitter who's going to be in the room with you, a friend or a partner, or a loved one. And then they will integrate the experience afterwards, both one-on-one and with group calls. So that's the easiest option in the United States. For people who are willing to go on a trip, there are places that will do psilocybin and MDMA outside of the United States, or can get yourself into clinical trial. That's also a great way to do it. But for those who are looking for the therapy, that's kind of where I would start. If they're looking to expand their consciousness, again, ketamine, as long as you have some type of depression or anxiety, you can get prescribed ketamine. So then if you're trying to expand your consciousness, the question is, who are you working with to help expand that? So maybe it could be a clergy member, it could be a guide of some sort, but you're using the medicine to just change the way you think temporarily, to separate the you from the you, so that you can look at the world a little bit differently. And that's a great place to start here. And then again, the retreats are amazing. You can go to Retreat Guru and look for plant medicine retreats. And there's a bunch as close as Tulum, Mexico, and Peru, Costa Rica, the Netherlands, Jamaica. There's a lot of those out there. And then for substance use, again, I come back, ketamine. What we're finding with alcohol and cocaine and different things, it's very, very effective. And then if you have someone who is specifically opioid or heroin challenging substance use dependency, ibogaine is incredibly powerful. It's a harder medicine. There's a lot of medical things. I have a whole chapter dedicated just to ibogaine in my book. But if I had a friend or a loved one who was addicted to heroin, I would personally find an ibogaine clinic for them and get them some help that way.
Yeah, I know there's no specific studies or research done specifically on pornography addiction and maybe psychedelic treatment, but is there any research, maybe with similar type of addictive or compulsive behaviors, maybe gambling, shopping, anything where, you're using your hands and maybe a piece of technology to stimulate?
Yeah. So the person who's the best that I know about in this world of dependencies, behaviors, is a guy named Gabor Mate. He has a movie that just came out called The Wisdom of Trauma, and he would say there are dependencies that we as a society frown upon. If you're a drug addict, boo, that's bad. If you're addicted to porn, boo, that's bad. You're a workaholic, you're a go-getter. You have an eating disorder, you're fat or you're too thin. But we have all these things that we as a society, we have judgments on compulsion. But we don't, for some reason, we don't recognize that it's not the compulsion, it's the reason why that person just chosen to manifest theirs in this particular behavior. So they're the same. Yeah, you're still running from something. You're still hiding from something. You're still doing this trying to get something out of this behavior that is not serving you well. So pick your flavor. That's what's happening. So what does a psychedelic do for any of that? It's going to be for a moment, help reset your mind, give you a second to think, what am I chasing? What's going on? And to look at whatever maybe the past traumas in your life were without the shame and guilt that are typically associated with them. So I'll tell you a challenging story for me. When I was a teen and I had some inappropriate sexual contact with a family member 10 years older. It was over a series of years. And it's something I felt really guilty about for a long, long time. But I don't know if you've ever done it. Like I put it in my box. Like I put it away. I'm just not going to address it.
Compartmentalized
it. Yep. And every now and again, someone would say something and I'd feel like my face getting red or my ears getting red. I knew it was trying to like get out of that compartment, but I'd push it back down. So here I am ways into these psychedelic experiences. And this was not my intention, but in one of these journeys, bam, I was right there again. And I couldn't believe it because I just don't think about it. But there I was, and there she was, and everything was happening, and I just couldn't believe it. But then I stepped away from myself, and I was watching it, and I was going, oh my God, you're just a kid. And this isn't your fault. This isn't just your hormones. And look at her. And I could say, wow, she felt so unloved. And she felt she had a father who essentially rejected her, and she was not as pretty or talented as her brother, and she had all these different things that were super, super challenging for her. So I don't have to forgive or condone what she did, but I can understand it. And from that, it just healed because I just had this empathy that before it was anger and embarrassment. And then it became empathy and understanding. Again, not forgiving or condoning, but I don't need to forgive or condone. I need to at least understand and move on. And I was able to do that. And so again, everybody has their things. And being able to look at them without shame and guilt is really a nice tool to be able to have.
That's beautiful, Matt. Thank you for sharing that. I believe that last couple of minutes, selfishly for the men that like I serve outside of this podcast with Rebuild Recovery, I know many of them personally that are going to resonate with that story. So I really appreciate you sharing that, and I think it's once we can learn to no longer walk in shame in what we're doing, what are or have been or have had done to us, not until then is freedom, and freedom being, no longer a slave to your behavior, your thoughts, your habits, your past, like walking out in true peace and joy every single day. Like you can never experience that if you're still caught up in the shame. So let's talk about the different types of psychedelics, because we've thrown ketamine, mushroom, psilocybin, ayahuasca, MDMA. So I know this could be a whole nother 3-hour conversation between us if we went super deep in all of them. But can you maybe kind of give us the 30,000 overview of the types, the differences in the different types of psychedelics?
Yeah, I'll touch on some of the building blocks. So we'll start with ketamine. Ketamine is a dissociative, so it typically doesn't have quite the extent of the hallucinogenic properties as some of the other ones I'm going to talk about here in a moment. but it does really allow you to step out of your body and to explore things. What's really interesting to me about ketamine is for people who've never tried any psychedelics, it's a 1 hour experience. So it's really manageable. And again, it's doctor prescribed, so you're not going to get it unless you are medically able to get it. You can take ketamine while you're on antidepressants. So none of the all the other ones is recommended not to be on, not to have an SSRI antidepressant while you take these other psychedelics, but ketamine you can. So it's kind of like you can try it and see how it works for you, and then potentially you can wean yourself off. You can do it at the same time. You have some options, but it's kind of like it's a really nice entryway, and it's legal. So it's kind of the only thing you can really recommend here in the States. When you move into a psilocybin which is a magic mushroom, kind of natural plant, natural medicine, you're typically people either microdose it, which is where they take a very what's called a sub-perceptual amount, and they take that typically either once every 3 days or 3 or 4 days in a row, and they take a little break. And that's where, and when you take a microdosing of a psilocybin, you really shouldn't feel it at all. You should be able to go about your day. You should you can drive a car, you can do all those things, but the theory is that it connects you to the people around you, makes you feel love, makes you more aware, and makes you a little bit more creative. Those are the concepts behind microdosing. And then there's macrodosing, where you're taking as high as 5 grams or more. And that's when you talk about an ego dissolution, and there's kind of everything in between. But psilocybin is a very grounding medicine, very loving, very connected. You do get those visuals. You get the walls can talk to you, the sky can fractal. You can see these beautiful. You can wear a black sleep mask with your eyes open, and it looks like you are in the biggest cathedrals you've ever seen in your life, like skyscraper churches, and just it's so beautiful. Or it can be beautiful. LSD would be a similar zone as a psilocybin. It's a synthetic developed in the 30s. MDMA is what's called more of a heart opener. So you're again not as many visuals, but it really helps you. It's used. Why is it used so well in therapy? It helps people talk. It helps people remove the shame and guilt. It helps them really look at their traumas. And it's getting a lot of success for that. And then you get into, I'd say ayahuasca is kind of another level up, where typically people do it for 3 nights in a row, or 3 or 4 nights over the course of 7 nights. And it's a very physical medicine. You typically have some type of purging event during an ayahuasca ceremony. But it's incredibly profound, and I have, at least in my experience, the purges all teach you something. I'll give you a quick funny story. I'm going to take a sidetrack here on the ayahuasca for a moment, and then we'll get into 2 more. I was in an ayahuasca ceremony. I ended up purging, and I looked at the bucket, and I realized that I was prejudiced against people who spoke in tongues. Never in my life have I thought really about people who spoke in tongues. I didn't think. But in that instant, I was like, oh my gosh, I think I've been judging people who speak in tongues. Like, that could never happen. Why are they doing that? They're just making it up. And in that moment, it's like, no, they weren't. This is an experience that they're having in their community, in their experience with whichever religion is leading that for them. And yeah, and I should not carry that judgment, and it was gone. But it was, again, very just strange. The purge can be beautiful, even though it's physical. And the only 2 other psychedelics I'll just touch on is DMT, which is part of what you get with in an ayahuasca experience, but you can take it purely. It's a shorter experience, 20, 25 minutes. Typically, you inhale it. Because it's so short, there's a lot of clinical trials trying to figure out how can we use that for some of these other things. But it's intense. It's like a rocket ship. You're going to take that, and you're going to go from 0 to 60 in under 8 seconds, 10 seconds. And for a lot of people, it's just, that's too fast So I think that's a challenge using it uh, in a therapy setting, but they're working on it. And then 5-MeO DMT is the last one I'll touch on, and that's the one like Mike Tyson's been talking about, and a bunch of different athletes. The On the street they talk about it as this is your private conversation with God, and it's a it can be beautiful. My experience with 5-MeO was again it's a rocket ship. It's super fast. It's short, 20-25 minutes, but it is, if there's an ego death in psilocybin, this is like I dissolved into math. Like you just disappear into the energy of the world. And for me, I heard this Om sound that I don't know, that attribute to kind of like the primal Aum sound that we hear a lot. And I just felt the energy and the love of the world. And that for me was where it's like, oh, I could see how there could be a heaven where there's this idea where we're all just energy and we're all in this place and there's plenty of room and there is only love um and safety in this room. And and then as you come back, or as I came back to my body, I could feel the energy in my hands. I could put it over my heart and feel like I was like pushing energy into my heart, or I could try to put my fingers together and I felt like I was holding like a ball of energy. So that's different medicine. Um, and they're studying it, but it's because of the rocket ship experience, it is a little bit challenging to use in a clinical, and certainly not where people would typically start with their psychedelic experiences.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'm glad when you were talking about the psilocybin mushrooms that you brought up microdosing, because that was something I definitely wanted to make sure we at least touched on. I'd like to maybe go a little bit deeper if you could here, because yeah, we've the 50 minutes or 45 minutes of this conversation, it's been very therapy focused, healing, journey specific, trauma, how do you kind of work through some of these things? How do you get out of your own way? But I know that there's a lot of incredibly successful people, there's industries and kind of the tech space that this has become popular over the last years. I know a lot of people in the creative world are using it as well. So can you just speak to a little bit more the uses of the microdosing, the benefits that in any of your personal experience
Yeah, I
with
think
it?
it was Tim Ferriss who said, "I don't know any billionaires who don't do psychedelics." Um, so it's in Silicon Valley. There's this famous study where they took people who were working on a problem and couldn't solve that problem for 3 months or more, and they gave them a single dose, a high dose of a psychedelic, and their whole intention wasn't spiritual, wasn't to expand consciousness. They went into it thinking about this problem, and over 70% came out and solved the problem. Big numbers. So the microdosing was kind of the technology hack of like, oh, well, if it works on a macrodose on these big levels, if I take just a little bit every day, will that help me be a better fill in the blank? And many people believe yes. So there's two different protocols, and actually I have a guide to microdosing. And what I'll do is I'll create a landing page. We'll do mattzemon.com/superhuman, and I'll put that PDF there where any of your listeners can go and just grab it, and it's just free. But what it'll talk about is these two protocols, the Stamets protocol and the Fatty Men protocol. So with Fatty Men, who wrote the Psychedelic Explorer, he says, take it on day 1, don't take it for day 2, let your body rest on day 3, take it again on day 4. So 1, skip 2. And then every month, give yourself a couple weeks off. So that's his protocol. Paul Stamets says, why don't you do it 4 days in a row, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then take off Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then every month, give yourself a couple weeks off. So either of those protocols are what people typically do. And the goal is to find a dose where you can function. You don't feel it. If you feel it, yeah, it's probably a little bit too much. You want to dial it back. And then again, just as a reminder, this is still illegal in the United States. So it's hard to find it. So what do people do? They find people locally who grow mushrooms, and they use a coffee grinder, and they grind it up themselves. They get those. If you look online for the empty pills and pill fillers. You could just make your own capsules. People do it that way. There's a Canadian company that actually sells and ships to the United States, which is amazing to me. I'm not quite sure how they do that, but they have a very good product. But yeah, so microdosing. And I guess, I mean, the book is, again, psychedelics for everyone. So certainly some people come because they're for religious beliefs. Some people come because it's medicinal. I don't think there's anything wrong with coming because it's for business purposes. I want to solve problems. I want to be more creative. I want to optimize myself. I think those are all different reasons that people are led to psychedelics.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I appreciate that there at the end. Can I ask you a personal question? You've talked about, in a sense, your faith here a little bit. Even if we go back to the beginning of the conversation, we talked about praying, meditation. You then, talked about in your 5-MeO DMT experience, kind of that awe, that sense of awe with, maybe an acceptance of a heaven out there. So I'm curious, Matt, if you'd be open to maybe talking about your faith growing up. Was it something that was a part of your life? And if so, how has it changed? And if it wasn't, how has faith or your view of spirituality or religion, kind of using all this, the same different terms for the same meaning here, how has that kind of changed for you?
Sure. So my mom was Catholic and my father is Jewish. So we joke that was a cashew. But it really wasn't an important part of our lives growing up. I couldn't understand how my father's mom and how that side thought they were the chosen people. And that left my mom's side out. I couldn't understand how my mom's side would say, well, then if you're Jewish, you're not going to heaven. And I couldn't understand that either. So I really ignored it as a kid. It just wasn't a part of my life. I liked the music. So I ended up singing in church choirs and doing that kind of stuff because I really, for whatever reason, was drawn to the music and did that throughout college. When my dad died when I was a junior in college, and my mom the year after. And I was really angry. And just was like, there is no God. This just doesn't make sense. This is just, I had, really no relationship with any spiritual practice. When we had children, we made them we all went to a Unitarian church because I wanted them to know the stories and I wanted them to make a decision for themselves. And I felt that community of a church group was important, but it wasn't because I personally felt that I had this spiritual connection. Fast forward in that very first psychedelic experience, all that went away. And of course there's a God, and of course there's a universe, and of course there's a higher power, and of course we're all connected, and of course we're all brothers and sisters, and of course I shouldn't be thinking about my nuclear family. I should be thinking about us all as a family. And I knew it. And every journey since then is a reminder of this. But as I said before, the medicines are catalysts. So then the habits start to change. So for me, it started a daily practice. So every morning I'm spending time meditating, I'm spending time journaling, I'm spending time reflecting. I'm trying to keep this front and center and remind myself that again, we're all brothers and sisters. We are loved. We're good enough right now as we are. I don't need to do anything today. I can do something, but I don't need to do anything to be loved and be safe. That all these false parameters I put on myself, my own definitions of success, you're just made up. We're just playing this crazy game that just doesn't exist. There are only rules if you agree to play by them. And it's So yes, I have a very deep spiritual practice at this point. But no, it was not. There was nothing pre psychedelics for me.
It's amazing. Thank you, man. Beautiful to hear. And, once again, I think today, my goal was to explore, your work, your world, your thoughts, a little bit. And if anything, maybe raise some questions in some people for their own selves. And like we talked about at the beginning, and I'm just kind of circling back, guys, I mean, hopefully, the listeners got something out of it. It wasn't a prescription. It was no medical advice, but I appreciate you, Matt, coming along this journey with me here today. Tell people about the book, and I know it's coming out. At the release of this episode, it's going to be out in a week or two, here in the middle of September, I believe. So yeah, tell us about the book, why you wrote it, and then where people can find it.
Yeah, so the book is Psychedelics for Everyone, and I mean, I felt like I had to write this book. When I started on this path, um, it felt like there was like a secret handshake that I didn't know. Um, and unless you're really willing to dive into either medical literature or it's just hard to get trusted information. So what I wanted to do is create a book that was written for the every person, every man. Anybody can read this. But I also want to make sure it was medically reviewed, so that it was factually accurate, it was information that people could trust. And what I do is I open up the book with some personal stories. I then do a whole section on just an introduction to psychedelics in general, touching on a lot of different information there. And then I just go medicine by medicine. And for each one, I have a beginner's guide. And then I have a little bit deeper of information depending on what the medicine is. And I'm hoping that it's like I said before, it's not too woo-woo, it's not too opinionated, that it gives people just a good understanding. There's a beautiful foreword in the book by a guy named Dr. Carlos Warder, who is written, 18 different books on consciousness expansion. He's an MD, PhD, and I'm very excited that he wrote the foreword for the book, and I think hopefully that people enjoy reading it. And then where is it? It's on anywhere books are sold. So you can get on Amazon, iBooks, Barnes and Noble. There's an audio book that'll be coming out in October. So the book will come out kind of mid-September, and then the audiobook is in October. And I read part of the audiobook, and then there's another person who reads a bunch, and it's exciting. It's all here right around the corner.
Yeah, incredible, man. Thank you for being here. Yeah, you guys catching this, at the release date right here at the end of August. Stick around. I'm looking forward to picking up a copy here myself as well. So before we bring it to a close here, Matt, with our final question, obviously we're going to drive people to the book. We have the mattzemon.com Superhuman for the microdosing guide. If people want to maybe connect with you, or are you hanging out anywhere socially online? Do you have things that you're publishing weekly, whether it's video content, so forth and so forth? Where can people get more connected with your work outside of the book?
Yep, I put up a lot on LinkedIn, and I am making a concentrated effort coming up here with Instagram, Facebook, and there's going to be a YouTube channel as well coming up.
Incredible, brother. Well, good luck with that, man, and just strap in for a ride, because building these social platforms is combination of time, consistency, and good content. So you have the good content, brother. Just a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate you lending us your hour here today. So you got that, man. If you just stay consistent with it, because we've been building YouTube for 2+ years now, a video a day, and finally catching some traction, hit the 1 million view mark last month, and just slowly growing, but yeah, I think we're aligned, man, with trying to help and trying to serve. So I appreciate you, bringing us your time and expertise here today. So we like to end every episode with a final question. It's the same question for all the episodes. You probably know it's coming if you check them out beforehand. But the title of the show is called The Superhuman Life. So Mr. Matt Zemon, as we bring today's conversation to a close, how would you define living a superhuman life?
So I have to admit, I'm not prepared for that question. I did listen to a bunch of podcasts, but I did not listen all the way to the end because I was trying to catch up. How would I define a superhuman life, or living a superhuman life?
Well, give me my definition. Maybe that'll at least. I don't want to guide you to where I want you to end up, but I come from the belief that we're all here for a purpose. There's a unique call it calling or purpose for every single one of us. We're all uniquely made with certain skill sets, but just knowing that isn't enough. Like, you need to be intentional in how you show up daily. You need to be intentional and aggressive in your growth and in action. And when you pair those two together, Matt, that's what I believe is ultimately creating and living out a superhuman life. Yeah, so that's how I define it.
I like that a lot. I mean, I think if there's a Buddhist expression where you talk about like, do you have the right mindset? Do you have the right vision? Are you seeing things the way they are? Are you speaking truthfully and not negatively? Are you listening and without judgment? Are your actions in accordance with your beliefs and everything's aligned? But I think all of that starts with just knowing that you're safe and you're loved, that you are good enough right now. And once you adapt that, oh, I'm good enough. So how can I now, how can I be an expression of love? How can I be a conduit of help? How can I help make whether I'm sweeping or running a Fortune 100, how can I make whatever it is that I do, how can I help spread that love and help spread that joy? But whether I swept or ran that Fortune 100 doesn't make a darned bit of difference in the grand scheme of things. It's just what I was called to do for that period of time. So do what you're called to do, and live with that. As a extension of love.
Love that so much. And guys, that's coming from a gentleman. We didn't even get into your business background, but I mean, probably one of the most successful entrepreneurs we've had on here, multiple exits and so forth and so forth. So guys, you're loved. And it doesn't matter what the material success may be defined at by others. When you're walking in your unique set of skills and you're in service of others, for me, that's where happiness, not even happiness, because I think happiness is fleeting. I think that's where joy and peace is found. So Brother Matt, thank you so much, guys. Thank you for tuning in with us here today. If you're new to the show, welcome. We're all about leveling up men in the 5 key areas of life. And if you want to help this mission in the show, you can support us in one or two ways. First off, leave us a 5-star rating or written review, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, whatever platform you're on. If you're on the YouTube side of things, make sure to subscribe. But most importantly, if there's somebody in your life that is maybe going through a tough stretch, maybe something, in today's conversation is what they needed to hear. So if you have that person in your life, do us a favor, but more importantly, do them the blessing by sharing today's conversation with them. But for Matt Zemon, author of Psychedelics for Everyone, and Frank Rich, your host of the Superman Life, we love you guys, and we'll see you next week.